it's less about, finding the hidden gem of, a story or a secret that no one's known about this person. It's more about, creating something that's going to further brand objectives.
Hello, and welcome to Freelance Pod. My name's Suchandrika Chakrabarti, and I'll be your host. Freelance Pod is all about how the internet has revolutionised work. Each week, I'll speak to someone working in a creative field and ask them how their industry has moved from analogue to a digital age, or how the internet has invented their job. If you like what we're talking about in the podcast, please do get involved on social. You can find Freelance Pod on Instagram as @freelancepod, on Twitter as @freelance_pod_. There's a Facebook group called Freelance Pod, and you can also sign up for the newsletter. The URL is in the show notes. Don't forget that the success of this podcast relies on you, the listeners. If you do enjoy it, please do rate, review and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, also known as iTunes. This means that other listeners will find out that this podcast exists and they'll come and join us too. This episode's guest is Deanna Cioppa, Executive Editor over at Contently. Now, if you're a freelance journalist and you've been trying to work out how to make ends meet, you've probably looked into content marketing. And Contently is probably one of the most famous platforms that enables you to do that. So Deanna talks me through how to build an interesting looking portfolio, how to present yourself as someone who'd be a good storyteller for brands, and also what kind of interviewing techniques you might need for interviewing people who are not used to being interviewed. It's kind of a modification of journalism interviewing techniques. So a really informative episode. Deanna was very forthcoming and had loads to tell me. With a background as a journalist, she kind of really understands what we're going through in terms of trying to move into content marketing. Don't forget that Contently also has a blog called The Freelancer, where you can read lots of stuff written by other freelancers about freelancing. And I had my first piece published over there this weekend. And it's kind of a love letter to this podcast and quite a personal look at why I decided to launch this. Just over 6 months ago, the podcast's 6-month anniversary was on April the 10th this year. And I'm so glad I began this, and it's made me more creative overall, I feel, and I go into much more detail in the piece, so do go and have a look if you're interested. So let's hear from Deanna.
My name is Deanna Cioppa, and I'm the executive editor here at Contently. I'd say journalism was my first real career, if you consider career vocation. I spent some time after my undergrad years figuring out what I was going to get into, whether it was the pursuit of music, which was one area, or writing. I dabbled in tech for a few years, sort of just as a way to pay the bills at first. And then I kind of fell into a track at a small tech startup. And, I have to say, I actually thank my lucky stars that I did take a little while before I ended up sort of making the decision to commit to journalism. I think my years at a tech startup, even though that wasn't in any way what my education background was, sort of facilitated an understanding of how business was run, how teams were run, how to, manage projects and programs. And frankly, was when I met with editors later on would tell me was something that they actually really liked about my background. So even though it wasn't, it's sort of come full circle now with Contently, but even though it wasn't necessarily a passion back then, it still was kind of all of a piece with where I ended up. So I made the decision after spending a few years kind of trying this and that to commit to journalism. I went back to graduate school at NYU and got my master's in their magazine program. I think magazine writing always appealed to me for sort of long form look at and deep dive look at specific topics. I loved the sort of tactile element of magazine and the way that design sort of influenced and was influenced by the text, even though I'm not a great designer myself. So yeah, I went back to school, focused on magazines, and ended up at a regional magazine here in New York out of grad school, which really gave me a nice firm basis in the editorial process, in what constituted good storytelling. I would advocate that everybody do work for a local, regional, or city or state magazine at some point. I think it teaches you not only how to report, but how to craft stories for a very specific audience in a way that sometimes it's harder to do when your audience is national or global. So that was a really good grounding for me. And I was there for a little while before I sort of heard the siren call of content. I was invited by a mentor of mine who had been in journalism for many, many years, helped run a major magazine along with his business partner. And I was invited to join a boutique content marketing firm that they were starting up in New York City. And I wasn't sure at first. I think I sort of, he had brought it up a few times in our conversations, and I had sort of waffled back and forth. There was part of me that was like, oh, content marketing, I'm selling out, I'm a journalist. How dare you? But the more I saw where content was going, and the more I sort of understood that storytelling was as critical to content marketing as it was to journalism, the easier the transition became. Not that it was very easy. I definitely had to sort of rewire my brain. But yeah, so I spent some time contracting with that content marketing firm, and at the same time was introduced to Contently also as a freelancer for many years. I started out writing for Contently clients, and then moved into a freelance managing editor position for a number of years before I moved in-house in October of 2017, I guess it was. So Contently is a company that at its core was created for and by and from and all of the prepositions, freelancers. So I think it helped a lot that I had a background in full-time freelancing, that I had my roots were in journalism and storytelling, but that I could understand what brands were looking to do. And a lot of that just came through interviewing them, applying the same sort of interview techniques I did in journalism to speak to brands and try to understand what they were trying to accomplish with their content. So that was a little rambling and long-winded, but so has my path been up to this point. There's not a much more concise way of talking about it. I run the Freelancer, our blog for freelancers, by freelancers, for Contently. And, so a lot of times I get questions from readers or even, from some of the freelancers that we work with regularly about the transition and what they can apply from journalism. And what's a little ironic is that, I also work with our clients very closely, with our brands. So it's funny because I see some nerves from journalists about making that transition. And what I see from brands is this fierce appetite for journalism level storytelling. So they come to us and they say, we want people who've written for X, X, and X. We want this caliber of storyteller. We want this. So they're hungry for journalists. And I think all journalists who are maybe either have been made redundant or are looking to create a new income stream for themselves or just expand their portfolio and their skill level, all they have to do is sort of raise their hands, show what they've done and, where they've been, and the brands are ready to kind of scoop them up. and they have been for some time. I think what's different now is that in the past, brands were leaning very, very heavily on the journalists and the freelance writers and videographers and photographers and designers to lead the way in terms of the direction of their content. And now brands have sort of bought in or are starting to buy in at greater rates when it comes to the value of content and the value of storytelling and how integral it is to what they do, to their marketing and to their brand definition, to their reputation building, to their loyalty building. I think before it was something that they heard, their marketing team heard or got some notice from the CMO that they had to start doing content. And they did it because they were told to do it. And now you see, I think as some, people with journalism backgrounds or editorial backgrounds move into the marketing space, they're sort of nurturing those early seeds. And we're starting to see brands get smarter about the kind of content they want to produce. They're getting more ambitious, which means that they need people who can execute at a very high level. And they're understanding the value of a collaborative partnership with editorial. So, it's not, they're no longer just soliciting ideas so that they can fill up a content calendar. They're being much more studied and much more conscientious about the stories that they produce. And in some cases, they're producing less content, but each unit of content is at a much higher level of quality, which means that they need journalists who really know what they're doing. So I think, which is all to say that, I think there might never have been a better time than now to sort of expand and look into content as an income stream, a revenue stream, or a vocation even. And the same goes for editors as well. It's not just writers. We have a very active pool of freelance editors who manage the freelance writers and designers and multimedia creatives in our network. And most of them come from journalism as well. And they're really, like any good editor, they're really attuned to audience, and they're attuned to the needs of the client, and they're sort of able to marry the two in really smart ways, and help guide both the freelancers and the client. So I think that, just to set the stage, I think that there's ample opportunity out there. We're certainly seeing it with our brands and with our freelancers to make the transition. Insofar as how to make it and the skills that transfer, I think for myself, probably the two most valuable skills as a journalist, no matter what your medium is, the two most valuable skills you can bring to content marketing are your ability to interview and engage an interviewee and ask the right questions, and your ability to ideate. If you can create great ideas based on the needs and objectives of your client brand, if you can help them get one step closer to their marketing or business goals through your story ideas. And that means taking a very, very close look and really ensconcing yourself or embedding yourself in what they're trying to accomplish and what their strategy is. And those are all things that we provide to our freelancers on the platform when they are staffed to a brand publication. They have access to the content strategy, to the topic areas, of course, to voice and tone guidelines, things like that, editorial style guides. I think that the more you can ensconce yourself there, the more valuable you'll be to a brand, because they're looking, if not for mind readers, they're looking for people who are willing to execute on their behalf and can do so, like I said, at a high level. That's ideation. I think when it comes to the interview skills, you're as a content writer, you're often speaking to people in some ways as you would as a journalist. You might be doing just straight interviews, expert interviews, as you produce a piece of content, whether that's an article or blog, whether that's a white paper or ebook. Chances are you'll have, a lot of the same kind of interviews you would have as a journalist. But you'll also be occasionally working with people who are not necessarily media savvy or used to sort of being in the spotlight. And that's especially true when you're working with subject matter experts in an institution, right? So a lot of our clients like to showcase or want to showcase their thought leadership, their expertise, their what differentiates them at a data level or a content level, and I mean content in the general sense, not content marketing. And they will work very hard to make their data scientists, their engineers, their healthcare specialists, their executives available. And that's not an easy thing to do for a marketer, because those people are often held behind firewalls to protect their time. But they'll work very hard to make those people available to writers. And it's then the writer's job, and it's not always an easy one, to pull out whatever story is being sort of held by this subject matter expert. And it's an art, really, and it's not as easy as necessarily interviewing somebody who's either used to being interviewed or has been sort of primed because, oh, hey, I have this article being written about me or about my area of expertise, and it's in this magazine, and I sort of understand the soundbite concept. So if you are an extraordinary interviewer, if you know how to pull stories out of people who are not necessarily used to telling stories, you're going to go very, very far in this business. And because, I think that's something that brands are getting, again, they're getting more and more savvy about. They're saying, it's not just about talking about our products. It's not just about talking about our corporate social responsibility and our volunteer programs as a way of sort of bolstering the brand reputation. It's about demonstrating what differentiates us from the competition. And that's oftentimes locked in the minds of people who are in the trenches at the business. We see this a lot with finance and banking and law, healthcare, certainly, engineering, and tech. So I say that those are two critical skills that you should not only keep honing, but also make very, very apparent when you're putting together a portfolio to try to attract branded content work. One of the challenges is getting buy-in up front, right? They've probably been told by the marketing team that they have to do this because, they're really... the marketing team really wants to highlight XYZ about the brand this year, but that's not their day to day. So they're set up. I think a lot of times they're set up to do this. The subject matter experts, are set up to do interviews, and they sort of have a little bit of information, but not a lot, and they're a little nervous, and they're by and large, I find they're always sort of worried about saying the wrong thing because they're representing the brand, they're representing their employer. So the best thing that you can do, and I think it's something that some journalists do already, but it's to sort of create sort of a mutual understanding, right, about what you're trying to accomplish with the piece, what kind of story, you want to tell, or your editor wants to tell. And that's something that certainly is, especially in newspaper journalism, right? You never want to lead your interviewee, or you try not to lead your interviewee. In content marketing, you're all working towards the same end, right? It's telling a great story about the brand, or about some element of the brand. So I think creating that mutual understanding where, you're all in the same team, you're just trying to create a great story that will attract people for one of however many reasons, that they can modify their answers whenever they want to, that, there will be eyes on this before it goes out to the world. And, ultimately, this is the kind of story we're looking to tell. And then you can kind of go into it. I think that, of course, you don't want to give too much away, because then they just sort of give you rote answers. But I think you don't have to worry so much about that, about remaining, I guess I'll call it an outsider, or remaining completely neutral, right? Because you're all working towards the same end. So it takes a little while, and it took me a little while too, before I could sort of abandon that notion of how to conduct an interview for brand. As a freelancer, once you take on that assignment for the brand, you're on the brand side, and it's your job to help tell that story in the best way possible. So that was something that I think surprised me at first, and it took me a little while to realize that. It took me a little while to realize that we're all aiming for the same thing here. But I think once you can create that foundation of trust at the outset, most people, and every journalist knows this, like, most people love talking about themselves and what they're doing, right? So if you're talking to a subject matter expert about something that chances are they're passionate about, if it's what they're an expert on, they're going to talk. They're going to give you plenty of information. It's your job to help sort of shape the rest of the interview so that you can turn it into a story, or into something that supports a story, rather than just a series of data points. But once you get over that hump and get them a little more relaxed, and create that understanding, they're happy to talk. Because in journalism, oftentimes when we're conducting an interview or reaching out to an interview, whether it's a celebrity or not, there's an idea that there's, chances are, like, you can probably get a second interview if you forget something. Whether it's the company an executive at the company, or a subject matter expert, chances are it's going to be very hard to get a second interview with them, right? Because they're conducting business, they're doing this on business hours. They don't necessarily have a movie or a cause to promote. Sure, they're talking about the business, but this is most likely a piece of content that's going to live, natively on their site. So it's not like they're, the Atlantic is calling them or something like that. Chances are you're going to get one interview. So I'd say be as prepared as possible. I think with content, it's less, I don't think you can count as much on that sort of freewheeling interview style where you just kind of have a conversation and you go for a walk with somebody and get coffee and see where it goes. You have a very specific objective. So I recommend, having your questions laid out, or at least the bare bones architecture of the interview laid out. Make sure you have the points that your brand contact wants to hit in order to create the message they're going to create. Just be as prepared as possible, because it's less about finding the hidden gem of a story or a secret that no one's known about this person. It's more about creating something that's going to further brand objectives. So that's the only other piece of advice I give about interviewing in the content space. Finance is one of our areas of highest demand. I think that finance, whether it's financial services or banks or wealth management. The finance industry is at a broad level understanding that it's not enough to put out, credit and equity research, or it's not enough to talk, if they're a consumer bank, it's not enough to talk about their new high yield savings account, that they have to provide value outside of their products and services. And they're looking for, the challenge with them is that they need journalists who can write credibly and who can understand some of the more, intricate and in-depth details of the space, and then distill it down in a way that your readership, whoever the readership is, whether it is a more sophisticated audience or whether it is more of a personal finance audience, can understand. So depth of understanding, depth of expertise, time in the industry is something that our finance, and I would argue all the sort of highly regulated industry clients are very, very interested in. If you can highlight that, they are going to be all over you looking for your work. Tech is another area, especially if you can speak to it from sort of a B2B perspective. If you can speak to, I'm just trying to think, whether it's fintech or security services, if you can speak at a level that will appeal to the CTO or the IT manager of, at a Fortune 500, you're going to be, you're going to have work, right? That's, it's depth. It used to be, 5-6 years ago, everybody was doing this very high level, top of funnel, pure awareness content. And they just thought if they could write about it lightly about a number of different topics and own those keywords, that was enough. People are now the market has gotten sophisticated enough where brands are looking to demonstrate, like I was saying, thought leadership and expertise, right? So they want people who can write at a very sophisticated level. And that's not all brands. There are certainly consumer tech brands who want people who can speak to the lay audience all day, and that's wonderful. But if you're looking to be paid top dollar per piece, that depth of experience is certainly going to go a long way. We're starting to see content making inroads at healthcare companies, and as opposed to health and wellness. So for a while, it felt like everybody had a health and wellness blog, right? The top 5 acai bowls to consume this week if you want to live forever. Now we're actually starting to see, companies that are producing lab equipment, and companies that are producing blood testing equipment, and or who deal in healthcare management. They are also in the content game now. And so the challenge there is to find people who, again, can understand and speak the language and the vernacular of these industries, but make it marketing friendly somehow, make it audience friendly. It's very hard to tell, stories about a centrifuge. But if you if you can understand the value of the centrifuge, it goes a long way to being able to find stories to tell about it. And so brands are looking for that level of expertise. You don't have to have worked in a lab before, but you have had to have a beat that, whether it was for a trade magazine or whatever, that gave you sort of an insider access. So I'd say those industries. I think law is going to be a place. Law is pretty well represented in the content space. Obviously, it's highly regulated. So I don't see as many law firms taking on freelancers, but that might not be the case in a few years. And of course, consumer facing tech and lifestyle will, there are content writers who that's their bread and butter, and they do great and they do fine just working with those. Travel, hospitality, the same. And what's nice about those brands is that because they've been doing content for longer in a lot of cases than some of these more highly regulated industries, they're starting now to do much more advanced and, frankly, much cooler content, right? So if you're looking to sort of stretch your skill set a little bit, I think you'll find that the hospitality space, the travel space, some lifestyle, and certainly tech is looking to explore, more advanced formats, deeper dive storytelling, in some cases, move into genres outside of traditional content marketing. I've seen hospitality brands do short fiction, and a tech brand, do a beautiful print magazine. So I think that the fact that some of these brands have been doing it for so long has allowed them now that they've kind of gained the confidence to try out some very, very cool formats. So certainly I think you'll have the opportunity to sort of spread your wings and fly in the lifestyle and consumer facing space. But if you have depth of expertise in an industry, you'll also be in high demand and will probably make some good money. So I love being a generalist. I was kind of a generalist myself, and I think that what they can do is focus in I would recommend at this point trying to build up a beat if you can. If you're looking to get work tomorrow, then I would say, for instance, if you're building or working on honing your Contently portfolio, I would say highlight your skill set, right? If your clips cover a wide swath of subject matter area, then we offer a section on the site to talk about your skill level, like your skill set in particular areas, interviews, profiles, things like that. And we also have a short bio that you can write. I would go really deep into what makes you a better contributor than the next portfolio over, right? So talk about the kinds of people you've interviewed, talk about your experience. If you have other languages you can write fluently in, talk about that. If there are if you can pick a sort of subtopic or subgenre in which you've worked, it's one thing to say I worked in the travel space or I wrote about travel. It's another thing to be able to say, I spent, a year writing about, Bolivia. Or I have a special focus in this. I know we're talking about generalists, but I would argue that most generalists have something that's very much of interest to them, and they can sort of shape a beat out of that. The way that we search for talent and the way that we have sort of a human component and a tech component, the way that we search for talent to staff our clients here at Contently, and both the humans and the tech look for keywords, and they look for specific skill sets and areas of expertise. So the more specific you can get, I think the likelier that you'll catch the eye of who or whatever is looking for you on our platform. So try to shape some kind of beat from what you've done, even if you're a traditional generalist. Highlight special skills that you have. Highlight formats that you have a depth of experience in writing or producing, And certainly if you're kind of a double or a triple threat, if you have, if you can do design work, if you've worked on, even if you just worked on a copy for infographics, if you have data visualization, anything like that, that can let us know or let brands know that you can not only help craft a story, but even if you're not the one designing it, you can think of it from a design perspective, or you can think of it from a video perspective, is going to go a really long way. So I think there are a lot of ways that you can differentiate. You just have to sort of pivot in one direction or the other. And, you can update your Contently portfolio at any time. So if you notice that like focusing in one area is not really working for you this month, just, refocus it up, change the order of your clips so that, so you've got sort of clips of a feather, stacked up at the top of your portfolio page. Maybe you write a little something about that, the 6 months that you spent covering, I don't know, the local hospital or the building of the local hospital, something like that. I think there are ways that you can tell stories with your portfolio that will help catch our eye. So I will say the majority of what our clients come to us for is writing. That's probably going to be our foundation for a very long time. That being said, we have an increasing number of brands who want video, and they want, reputable, experienced videographers and production teams who can carry out their vision. I would say we have an increasing number of brands as well who are looking for podcasters and people who understand that space. Social media is a little, most of our brands and most of the brands I encounter have an internal social media team. So they might, if anything, they'll ask for our writers to include social media copy with the stories that they submit. But by and large, I don't think it's something you have to hide. I think you can talk about it in your bio, but it's not something that I see brands, at least the brands we work with, the larger brands, looking for freelance help. Now, if you're looking outside Contently, there's certainly, a ton, I'm sure as your listeners know, a ton of smaller, medium-sized businesses that need social media help. So, as always, you have to think about your audience. If you're sending your Contently portfolio link to some smaller businesses outside of, your relationship with Contently, to have them look at it, tailor it to the audience. Then for that day, maybe move your stuff up as it's most pertinent to what they want. I'd say, it's so hard. It's kind of what you want to get out of it, right? So if you're looking for writing work, obviously put the pieces you're most proud of that are most representative of the kind of work that you can do up at the top. If you think that, but maybe include in your bio, maybe make sure that you have, podcaster or, writer, podcaster, and, videographer, if you're that hyper talented. But I would say, we're going to go, if it's us, we're going to go through your clips. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. What's more important is that you illustrated what you can do in your bio and in your skill set section, because that's sort of the first thing we scrape to make sure that we're on the right path, and then we start looking in through the clips. So make sure you have it highlighted in your bio, and then I really think that it's about putting your best clips forward, right? Just like, the rule of digital marketing now is to put all the good stuff at the top of the story because people don't finish. We will finish looking through your stuff, but it's just, I would put what you're most proud of at the top. And, I think that's kind of a baseline, and then, switch it up and see if you get a different response based on that. Your portfolio is your brand, right? And certainly how you conduct yourself and your level of professionalism and things like that are also part of your brand. I think journalists understand from an editorial level about writing for their audience. Certainly, editors do, and I think journalists do at an editorial level. But I think what you have to understand as a journalist, if you want to move into the content space, that you have to brand yourself for your audience as well, right? You have to present yourself based on what your audience needs. So if your objective is to get X amount of work, in the finance space, then you better highlight all of your finance journalism experience front and center, up at the top. I think that you better speak to, the publications you've worked for, your beats that you've worked on at great depth. You're essentially, and most importantly, how you can solve the problems of your potential clients. So, all content is a way of solving for a need for brands. And, the people who create that content are also fulfilling that function. They're solving a problem. They're solving a pain point. They're fulfilling a need. So the more that you as a journalist can write about what you bring to the table, not just in skill level, but what you can do to serve the needs of, say, financial clients who need vibrant storytelling, or financial clients who need to reach, lay audiences, the more likely it is that someone's going to, highlight their portfolio or add you to their shortlist, because they get the sense that you understand them, you understand what their problem is, and presumably you'll know how to fix it. So that's all that this is showing how you can solve a need. And that doesn't mean just showing your skills, but showing that you understand the need. I'd love for your listeners, I'd love to invite them to read The Freelancer at contently.net and to register for a portfolio at contently.com/register so you get a chance to work with our clients.
Thanks to Deanna for giving some really, really helpful advice on building Contently portfolio and taking our journalistic skills and making them useful for brands. Adding content marketing to the mix of your freelance projects is a good way to earn a bit more money. And I'm always up for learning new ways and genres of writing. I feel it just makes me a better writer. So, go over to Contently, and I've got a portfolio on there, suchandrika.contently.net. Have a look if you want an idea of how to build one. Well, that's it for another episode of Freelance Pod. If you enjoyed what we talked about in this episode, please do get involved on social. You can find Freelance Pod on Instagram as @freelancepod, on Twitter as @freelance_pod_. There's a Facebook group called Freelance Pod, and you can also sign up for the newsletter. The URL is in the show notes. Don't forget that the success of this podcast relies on you, the listeners. If you do enjoy it, please do rate, review and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, also known as iTunes. This means that other listeners will find out that this podcast exists and they'll come and join us too. That's it for now. Speak to you again soon. Goodbye.